Opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Thank you for joining us on Farm Connections. I'm Dan Hoffman, and I'm pleased to introduce our guest this evening. In the studio with me today is George Cummins, retired Iowa State Extension educator. And also by phone, Glenn Hill, Executive Director of the Minnesota Food Association, Marine on St. Croix, Minnesota. George, you've been on the show before, and welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
George, tell us a little bit about what you've done just since you retired very recently.
I've got a whole bucket list of things to do. Top of the list was to keep my wife working. I have a number of interests, one of which, of course, is international agriculture. My passions are agriculture and education, and I hope to do more in that area than I was able to do. My whole career, of course, has been built.
George, excuse me there. We're going to go to Glenn for just a second. Glenn, are you on the line still?
Yes, I'm here.
Could you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into Minnesota Food Association as Executive Director?
I'll make it brief, but I went to school in Montana and studied wildlife, but I worked on ranches there, and that perked my interest in working in agriculture. And when I graduated, I joined the Peace Corps, and they sent me to Thailand, and I lived in Thailand and Burma for about 20 years, primarily working with small-scale farmers, and eventually got married and had a couple kids, and my wife and I decided we should move back to the States to raise our kids, and so came back to Wisconsin where my parents live, and after looking around, eventually found Minnesota Food Association, which is a great fit for me because we're training new farmers and training immigrant farmers.
Thank you, Glenn. We'll come back to you and apologize for the technical difficulty. But George, we were asking you about your activities since you retired, and you said you've been very busy doing household chores and making sure your wife gets to work. And then you just began to talk a little bit about your passion for feeding the world and food production. Can you take up right there, please?
Well, I guess, I've had a career based on agriculture and education. I'd like to pursue some of those. My whole career has been built on the backs of volunteers, and a lot of them are reminding me it's payback time, and I hope to do some more of that volunteer type work.
So they're calling on you to help with projects?
Absolutely.
What's your favorite?
I don't know if I have a favorite. They're all fun, they're all interesting, and bring them on.
Well, you mentioned a number of organizations before the show, such as Kids Against Hunger and Feed My Starving Children. Any thoughts on that at this time?
I guess I would start by, well, let's start with some statistics. There's 6.5 billion people in the world, and it's estimated that 1 billion of those are malnourished or hungry. And the majority of those are probably women and children initially. Dr. Borlaug, who we'll probably quote several times this evening, has made the statement that hungry people are desperate people, and you can't build world peace on empty stomachs and human misery. And so I think where I'd like to take this is the food security issue. People fight over food and so on. Many of you have heard the cliche about give a man a fish and he eats for a day, and teach a man to fish and they may eat indefinitely. And then there's a couple additions to that, provided that there are fish to catch, there's available resources, and there are have access to the pond, political and empowerment. And I'd like to maybe bring in some of the local organizations that have been doing this. First, Give a Man a Fish, charity, disaster assistance, and so on. Two groups that are headquartered in the Twin Cities that many of our viewers may be familiar with, that participated in. One would be Feed My Starving Children, and we've got a website for them. The other is Kids Against Hunger, have a very similar format. Volunteers come in and they package meals. Our community in Charles City just did this about a month ago, packaged 100,000 meals for Haiti, which sounds like a lot, but if you've got 2 million refugees that like to eat every day, it's very temporary. Obviously, when you do something like this, you're not solving food security problems long term. It's immediate stopgap that you have to do, and quite honestly, your attention gets diverted. There's other disasters and so on, and you get donor fatigue. People, you say, we did our thing, and let somebody else take over. So that's a temporary fix. When you start talking about teaching people to fish, it implies that there is a value in education. Many of our assistance programs, mission efforts and that type of thing involve teaching. In many of the African countries where I've worked, agriculture is not high priority. People don't do very good ag research. They don't have the right answers. They don't have good extension. And they don't have a land grant system like we do here in the United States, where we have the resident instruction at our universities like University of Minnesota, Iowa State, the land grant universities that are spread around the country, the research network that's nationwide to provide the answers, and the Extension Service that gets the information to people that can use it. This is a unique system which has served us well, and it's lacking in many foreign countries. Many of the problems with food security provide there's fish to catch, and if you know how to fish and you're in the middle of a desert, that doesn't do you a whole lot of good. Many of the countries have resources. Lots of times they are in commercial hands, and the wealth is not shared with the people. They don't benefit from those resources. And in a lot of developing countries where there's food shortages, agriculture is very challenging. We can make the desert bloom, other countries have, but it takes technology, it takes education, it takes capital, and that's a problem in many countries. And lastly, and I think the most limiting factor, do the people have access to the pond? And many of the people that have food problems do not have good land. They don't have access to the land. They're refugees. They're displaced. Glenn is working with some of these people. I think that would be a good tie-in with this philosophy. These are government issues that have to be addressed at that level.
And Glenn, maybe you can expand on that. What's the Minnesota Food Association doing about some of the issues, including access and politics and geography and things that are causing food shortages around the world?
Well, that's kind of a bigger fish to catch than what we're working on. We're not really a policy and advocacy organization. We focus on training new farmers in sustainable farming, and sustainable means being economically viable, ecologically viable, and being socially viable, being part of your community and building local economy. What I think I'd like to touch on right now, or initially, is I think there's mixed feelings about people who immigrate to the United States, and I think it's important that we take a look at why the people are here. And basically, we all have our immigrants or ancestors of immigrants. Even the farm we're working on now in Marine-on-St. Croix, if you look at the journals from 1890, when the farm started, he says they had immigrants working on the farm, and they were Danes and Norwegians and Finns. But a lot of the we work with Hmong farmers. We work with farmers from Mexico, farmers from Burma, and not all refugees and immigrants come here. They don't come by choice. A lot of times, they come by they're victims of circumstances, and many times those circumstances are results of various U.S. policies. For example, the war in Vietnam. And we recruited the Hmong to fight with us against the communist government, and we didn't win, and they became refugees. And it is partially our responsibility to take care of them. But what's interesting is for example, with the Hmong farmers, they have a great reputation for farming in Minnesota. What we're noticing is that many people who have been farming for many years in Minnesota, there are some small things and some more major things that they could do to greatly improve their yields and greatly improve their efficiencies in farming. And what they're farming on 2 acres of land, they could do much better with learning how to control weeds and how to space your crops and how to do succession crops. And the whole issue of soil fertility is not really well known from our experience with Hmong farmers or immigrant farmers in general. And so while they come from an agrarian background, it may not be the same climate or the same soil types that they are used to. And so we try to build on that experience that they have in farming, and to introduce new methods and new technologies that can increase their production. I find it really fascinating. I think it's great. And what I'm so excited about is that this is production. These are, the farmers, new farmers, they're producing. It's not a service. It's not making money on money or providing a service. They're producing a product, and it's a product we all need and we all want, is good, fresh, local food. I had lived overseas for probably 20 years, and I would come back pretty much every year, but it was interesting for me to see literally the growth of people in the United States over the last 20 years. People, honestly, if you're not here every day, people are getting bigger, and it has to do with our food. Somehow it has to do with our food, what we're eating, and like George said earlier, there's 1 billion people that are malnourished. I think a lot of folks in the United States may not be malnourished, but are not properly nourished. And I think we're starting to realize that. And so hence we have this strong interest in local food. And I feel grateful for not just immigrant farmers. We're not making that distinction. I think for all farmers who are working to produce food and to build local economy, I think it's a very noble cause.
George, any thoughts on Glenn's comments?
I think we definitely see the difference between the haves and the have-nots, and I observe people that are dieting and some people that are starving, and maybe in the same community.
Well, Glenn, what's probably one of your greatest success stories with immigrant farmers that you've trained?
I think one of our greatest success stories are a couple of brothers from Mexico who were farmers in Mexico, and then as the result of NAFTA, at least that's how they described it, that basically they couldn't compete anymore, and they came to Minnesota and wanted to be farmers, and they work in a factory during the night and they farm during the day. And they went through our program from 2006 to 2008 and eventually saved up enough money to purchase their own small farm. And they're just excellent, absolutely excellent growers. They're we had a contract with Chipotle. We sell green peppers to Chipotle for their restaurants in Minnesota. And for the past 3 years, most of the green peppers that we have been selling to Chipotle have come from these two brothers. I call them the Kala brothers. And then starting this year, we decided that we want to support their burgeoning farm business, and we work with Chipotle, and we have turned over the whole contract to the Kala brothers. So this year, Minnesota Food Association is not selling green peppers to Chipotle, but the Kala brothers are selling green peppers to Chipotle for Chipotle restaurant. And these two brothers, in the past 4 years now, they know how to do organic certification. They farm organically. They do their own certification. They follow food safety procedures. They do their own good agriculture practices certification. And it's an amazing success story. So now they have a very good contract with Chipotle, and they continue to develop new markets. And yeah, I'm very happy for them, and I think it's a great success story.
Thank you. Glenn visited about his travels and living abroad. George, you lived offshore about 6 years. Mm-hmm. So maybe you have some observations about differences and similarities.
Yeah, I lived in and worked in Africa for 5 years, and then I spent 14 months in South Korea in the military. International travel, where you're there not as a tourist but as a professional, I guess you'd say, observing, you see well, the impact of American policies, our government policies. You see the influence of American companies, and we have some headquartered here, the Cargills, the John Deeres, the Pioneer Hybrids, and so on. You see the results of the efforts of our non-governmental agencies, our missions, our church groups, service clubs, humanitarian organizations on the ground. You also see the contributions that individuals have made, and I guess, like a Dr. Borlaug, the impact that one person can have on solving the problems. It's a life-altering experience, I think. One of the things I realize is that there's different cultures and they do things differently and so on, whether it's politics, religion, race, ethnicity, gender, whatever. There's differences, but we have some similarities. And if we just focus on the similarities, the basic human needs that people have, we all have physical needs, and we have aspirations for ourselves and our kids. We want opportunity. And if we can focus on them, I think it'd be a better world.
You quoted Mark Twain earlier. Do you remember that quote?
Yeah.
Well,
have you got it in writing? I can't quote it.
I think it went something like this. Travel is fatal to prejudices, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. What do you think Mark Twain meant by that?
I think if you get out and live and work with other people, you realize that they're decent people that, again, have some common goals that we all share.
You mentioned the World Peace Prize, or the Food Prize. Mm-hmm. Can you expand on that some? Sure.
Dr. Borlaug, of course, received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for his work with the Green Revolution, and many people are not aware of what he's done since in the last 40 years. In 1986, he founded the World Food Prize in Des Moines to recognize people who have increased the production, quality, or distribution of food. To date, there have been 30 recipients of this prize from 11 countries. And again, it goes across all sorts of differences, political, ethnic, race, etc. But the common focus is food security. And these are people that have devoted their lives and their life's work to that purpose. Yesterday in In Washington, D.C. at the State Department, the 2010 winners were announced, and I think people in our viewing area will probably recognize some of these people. David Beckman heads Bread for the World, which is an advocacy organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. They try to influence our nation's decision makers, public policy. And I was just checking the website, and we can get the website for people. But they have links to position papers on hunger and poverty, food aid reform, tax credits, child hunger, topics that we could incorporate into our discussion tonight. The other recipient is Joe Luck, who leads Heifer International, and many people have worked with that organization over the years. They provide income-producing animals to people in need, generate cash, create economic opportunities, and the idea is that you pass the gift on to someone else, some of the offspring from that initial offering. Also, more information is available on their website, and we can get that to you. The World Food Prize will be awarded at a symposium in Des Moines in October. The dates are October 13th to 15th, and the theme for this year's symposium is Get It to the Farmer. The information on the university campus or in the first world does no good to the people that actually can use it. This was a deathbed request from Dr. Borlaug, and so that's the theme for this year's symposium, a world-class gathering. The website, we can get that to you. If you go to the World Food Prize website, there's information about the symposium, about Dr. Borlaug, about all the laureates, and what they've done to affect our lives directly and indirectly. For our younger viewers tonight, I'd like to encourage them to go to the website and check the World Food Prize Youth Institute. Students and teachers are invited to go to the symposium. There's a special extra day where they will give a presentation that they've prepared to one of the laureates, to some development experts. From that group, 12 to 15 will be selected for summer internships at some of the world research centers. CIMMYT in Mexico City, the International Livestock Research Center, Potato, many different countries. Again, it's a life-altering experience for young people that I encourage anybody to check out.
Thank you. And George, you mentioned a number of websites. If the audience wasn't able to get that off the television screen, they can just email the station and Farm Connections, and we'll follow up with some of those.
You bet. Lots of good information.
Thank you, George. Glenn, we've got about 4 minutes left. Any last comments that you'd like to mention about your work teaching immigrants to farm?
One thing I want to say ditto to George's comments on similarities among people around the world. I think it's a more positive, it's more encouraging, and it's just a better feeling when we think of the similarities. And you know, when it comes down to it, people seek security. You know, they love their children the same way you love your children. They care about their community. They care about their land. There are more similarities than there are differences. We may worship a different God. We may eat different food. We may take our shoes off at the door. Those are minor. I mean, people are people, and we have a heart and we have a mind, and treat people with respect. And what it makes me think, you know, what I reflect on our farm, we have farmers from Burma, Kenya, Mexico, people that would never get together in normal life, but they get together at our farm. And when you get farmers together, no matter where they come from, they can find stuff to talk about. They have a lot in common, a lot of similarities, and it's just fascinating to watch how racial and language barriers just break down when you get farmers in a field. And that's really enjoyable in my work.
I think that's true in Minnesota. I think that's true in Iowa. Visiting across the fence post or at the elevator. George, again, we have about 4 minutes left. Any comments in conclusion?
We have talked about the statistics, 1 billion. And I'm reminded of a quote from Joseph Stalin, who was not exactly a humanitarian, but he said, 1 million deaths is a statistic, and the death of one person is a tragedy. Hungry people, starving people have a face, they have a name, they have a presence, they have feelings and needs and aspirations, again, like us all, dreams. And when you personify hunger, it brings it home, and you want to try and help people. If you know who you're trying to help, if you face to face, and that's what international travel does. I've been in refugee camps, I've seen starving people, and it haunts me.
Glenn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, I have too, and yeah, it does haunt you. I don't know. I just encourage people to travel. If you can travel, yeah, travel, and if you can travel with a purpose, if you can be a volunteer, if you can go do something in some kind of a way or a trip or take a time out in your life and go do something, the rewards are 10 times. Yeah.
Is there a way to have people in Minnesota, Iowa, or the upper Midwest, or anywhere for that matter in the United States, visit your farm and actually see firsthand what's happening?
Oh, sure. People are very welcome to come and visit. Welcome to visit anytime, but we do monthly community work days on the first Saturday of the month. We invite, it's open to the public, anybody who wants to come out to the farm. We kind of have a work party and divide up chores, and it's really great for families who want to have their children have a first-hand experience on a farm. And then we have a spring open house, which is passed, but we have a fall harvest party, which is open to the public. And okay, all right, thank you.
Minnesota Food Association, Marine on St. Croix, and I'm sure that people can Google that in the audience. With us in the studio is George Cummins, and thank you. For more information, log on to ksmq.org. I'm Dan Hoffman from Farm Connections. Thanks for joining us.